Welcome to the Mees Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mees, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experiences you could trace like a stencil.
My guest today is the world-renowned cheesemaker, CEO, and co-founder of Jasper Hill Farm, Mateo Kehler. Mateo has not only won every national and international cheese award imaginable, he's more importantly spreading his mission of meaningful work, leading the revolution against the commoditization of the craft of cheesemaking, and in his own words, reversing the flow of capital back into rural communities. This was one of the most inspiring and educational conversations I've had in a long time. We discuss creating a culture of high standards through actions, the importance of diversity, why people and a clear vision matter most in any endeavor, and so much more. And yes, of course, we talk about cheese. I hope you enjoy. This podcast is brought to you by Mees, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built, so the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Mees is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food cost and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmees.com. Mateo, welcome to the pod.
So awesome to be here with you, Josh.
I'm stoked, man. I've been really excited about this conversation. I know we got connected by our mutual friend Sergio, who works at Mees as well. You know, I've known about Jasper Hill for many years, but the way he tells the story is just so illuminating. And the minute I decided, let's do a podcast, we were like, we got to get Mateo on. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely. And, Sergio he was there at the birth, he was working for a Provisions International distributor in White River and watched us grow up. And in many ways, we grew up together.
Yeah. Well, for the audience that might not know as much, I think there's a lot of chefs and restaurant owners and things like that. Maybe you could just tell a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are and why Jasper Hill exists.
So my brother Andy and I have a long connection to Greensboro, and we are both carpenters in a previous life here. And we were building houses, mostly second homes, watching the fragmentation of the working landscape here. And the dot-com bubble was just blowing up real estate values where we were. And we saw ourselves contributing to kind of the extinction of this place that we loved, right? And so fundamentally, that's foundational experience for us. And, my family's been summering on Caspian Lake in Greensboro for 5 generations. We're about to celebrate our 100th summer on the lake. And Greensboro is a happy place of our collective family childhood. And we're basically getting priced out of paradise. So this piece of land came on the market. It was 200 acres. It was up off the lake outside of town. And we basically made this emotional, irrational decision and pooled our life savings and bought this 200 acre, rundown, ramshackle, abandoned farm. No idea what we were going to do with it. It was really a quest to satisfy 3 intrinsic needs: meaningful work in a place that we love with people that we love. And, at its root, Jasper Hill is our attempt to satisfy those 3 needs.
So when you bought the land, was cheese something in your mind, or was it just...
No.
Wow.
We had no idea. We had no idea what we were going to do. We just knew that if we didn't do something, we were never going to be able to afford to live here. And so that was 1998. We took a step back to try and really kind of vision what a life here would be. And the meaningful work part, really kind of rose to the surface. And when we looked at what was happening in our local economy and what was happening to the landscape and kind of the character of our town, we made the decision that we would like to try and start a business that would compete with development as the highest and best use of the land, right? And the footprint of the dairy farmer on the landscape here is what's defined the pastoral beauty of Vermont, and especially of like, the northeastern part of the state, where it's just this patchwork of farm fields and like forests, working lands, really, that make this place so beautiful. And, dairy farming was in like a steep decline. And we very naively thought that if we could demonstrate that you could make a good living milking, 50 cows on a rocky hillside farm and, afford health insurance and put your kids through college and save for retirement, that would just be like a game changer. That all our friends and neighbors here would, just hop on this like farmstead cheese bandwagon and like, it would be a movement. And we had no idea how much work it was going to be. It's really more work than I can describe. It's never done.
I'm sure we'll talk about that, but it's so interesting that I didn't know that when you bought the land, the cheese wasn't really like the first thing you thought of. But it almost like, I think with any business, the ones that are like evergreen that last the longest have to have some sort of deeper vision than just I want to make great cheese. And I think that's probably, given how hard, it's probably much harder than what we do in the restaurants, but and that's really hard. But because it's so hard, if you don't have that really, really sort of deep vision of like what you're trying to change in the world, it makes it not even worth it. So that's really cool. I didn't know that. How long did it take from let's buy this really rundown piece of land to okay, now we have a cheese now we have a cheese facility?
About 5 years, right? So it took us 5 years to understand what we wanted to do, go out into the world. I went to Europe a few times and worked with cheesemakers in Britain and visited cheesemakers all over, Italy, France, Spain. Had to write a business plan and actually get financed, was a real stretch. As my brother Andy likes to say, we didn't know a teat from a telephone pole. So like convincing a banker that like, lending us money to start a dairy farm and then cheese on top of it was like, it was a real stretch. We had like denial of service repeatedly for a couple of years.
So is debt financing that you got, not any sort of equity?
Yeah, we started this business with $80,000 in cash and $230,000 loan. We're debt financed, and there's a couple of different chapters here. The growth and evolution of like Jasper Hill as an organization is really like a family of businesses. We have partners in some businesses, but it's really, kind of an agglomeration of businesses that are inhabited by people. And as it turns out, people are the main ingredient, right? And we learned that early on. There's about 85 of us in the family of businesses at this point, and it is so complicated what we do that it's almost like an organism, really. And without, like fully committed people that are invested in the vision and in the mission of the business, we would never be able to like both achieve the quality, which is like the key to succeeding in the mission part.
Yeah, and I think we definitely want to dig into that sort of what you built with the cooperative and things like that. But what I sort of gained from first chatting with you, and also just of course just eating the cheese so often, is that it's so blatantly obvious that you have this maniacal kind of devotion to really, really high quality products, no matter what. And it's something of course as a chef, especially coming from the fine dining world, I can really relate to. But having this sort of fully vertically integrated business and all these disparate sort of, types of people working within your organization, how do you create that culture of quality with so much complexity and so many different people doing different things and still maintain this bar that you have?
I think, being the best, best in class or like best in the world or best at anything creates a sense of pride and ownership, participation, and community. The work is bigger than any one individual, and it takes everybody in the whole chain to like demonstrate a commitment to a cause in order to really like succeed there. So I think that, we started with a mission statement, which was to be the standard bearers for quality and innovation in the artisan cheese industry. And that's the driver for, the second part, which is to develop the economic mechanisms for the conservation of the working landscape and our soil and water resources. So, we have an environmental mission and a quality of life mission and a community based philosophy that creates an immense amount of buy-in from the people that live and work here, right? Because we can see the direct impact of our work around us, right?
Yeah.
Farmers earning a living wage for their work. Our general store, gets a new paint job and like an upgrade. Our local general store is like the beating heart of our community. There are kids in our school, right? There are restaurants and bars where before it was like there was nothing, right? And so there's culture and there's life, and a community that was in decline and graying, right? The like brain drain and, the flight of young people away from us has slowed down. And we're a little island in this region where, Vermont is experiencing, a lot of brain drain. The pandemic kind of shook that up a little bit because a lot of people moved here from New York and Boston and all over the place. Climate refugees are coming now. So that's changing to some extent, but the meaningful work part is really about building this livable community.
Yeah.
And, that meaningful work in the place that we love with people that we love thing is a thread. And, that has enabled us to attract people from all over the country to move into like the middle of the Northeast Kingdom. I call it the geographical center of the middle of nowhere. There's more people in every direction from where we are. So it takes like really participating in the production of something that's like authentic, primordial, real. And, that's what we do. We're like milking cows and milking goats and managing like grass and connecting consumers to something that is like primordial and real.
Yeah. I mean, it seems so novel, but I'm sure it's not even intentional, but your commitment to excellence and then having that really clear vision of how to effectuate change and create meaning is actually what seems to have galvanized all the people and all the interworkings of your business to actually be able to work the way it works. I'm sure it wouldn't work without that really clear vision that everybody is really clear on.
Yeah. Well, I crave meaning and purpose. I can't get out of bed without it. And there are lots of days where I see my role as kind of chief meaning officer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because the actual work of milking cows and making cheese is like this endless drudgery and a grind. If you can do that work and understand like what the impact and meaning is, you have a totally different experience than just showing up and like, scrubbing, two bricklayers side by side doing the same work. One guy's laying bricks, the other's building a cathedral.
Yeah.
And they're doing the same work, but they have totally different experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah. It reminds me of, and not a direct comparison by any means, but I don't know if you read the book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Incredible book, but just the premise of finding meaning in suffering, is one of the only ways as humans we can actually find real meaning because, we're going to always suffer. And some of the best things are found through that. And this sounds
Absolutely.
like no different.
We suffer a lot. We suffer a lot. There's a lot of suffering in the production of world-class cheese.
I bet. Yeah. Well, why don't we talk about that a little bit? So I think most of the country, knows about a lot of your cheeses. My wife and I alone have probably eaten a ton of it. Harbison is her favorite cheese in the whole world. But you have this cooperative and you have all these other sort of folks that you're working with, and you do a lot of the affinage, of the cheese. I always pronounce that word wrong, by the way. And Sergio gives me a hard time about it. But
no, you got it. You got it.
Oh, good. Okay. But can you talk a little bit about like this cooperative that you built, sort of what happened when you started partnering with Cabot, and just generally kind of dig a little bit more into how it works, with the creamery?
Yeah, sure. So we never intended to do anything other than milk cows and make cheese and have a life on the land with our families. And then Cabot Creamery knocked on our door and asked if we would make for them a private label, like English style bandaged cheddar, which was a ridiculous idea. This is like 2003, the year that we started making cheese, right? And we hadn't sold a scrap of our own cheese yet. And we were milking 15 heifers. We were barely making enough milk to hit the agitator paddle on our cheese vat.
Mm.
And we, instead of dismissing them, because we weren't their first stop, I think we were their eighth or ninth stop, like asked them to entertain the idea of actually making the cheese, and we would ripen it. We would do the affinage because we had the cellar that we had built under our creamery, and there wasn't any cheese in it because we were in startup mode. We worked with them, charged them a per pound per month aging fee. The cheese was incredible. After 18 months of R&D, they came and picked up about 10,000 pounds of cheese and took it back to a warehouse in Williston, Vermont, and tried to sell it. And this cheese is covered with mold, right? And in a nutshell, that's our business model: grow mold on cheese. And so it couldn't go to their cut and wrap plant, and couldn't ride on their trucks. It couldn't use their distribution system because, from their perspective, it was tainted. If you go to Walmart and buy a chunk of Cabot cheese and there's a little, spot of blue mold, it's like freak out mode, right?
Yep.
And so, they tried to sell this cheese. It turned out their customers didn't understand this cheese, and their sales team didn't really get this cheese. And our customers at the time were a bunch of snobs that wouldn't buy cheese from Cabot. And so, after 4 or 5 months, called them up to see how it was going, whether, this relationship was going anywhere. And they had sold 5 wheels of cheese, and I asked them if they would like some help moving this product. And our customers trusted us. And I was able to, place 10,000 pounds of Cabot cloth bound in about 10 days.
Wow.
But the part that was really transformative was that we were a FedEx-based business with a dial-up internet connection at that point. And we built our first pallet, put Cabot cloth bound on the bottom, put Bailey Hazen Blue on top of the Cabot cloth bound, and the Constant Bliss on top of the Bailey Hazen Blue. And then we called all our friends and neighbors up and told them we had a pallet going to San Francisco. We had a pallet going to Chicago. We had a pallet going to New York. And we started aggregating cheese, which was great for, local cheesemakers, but it was a real service for our customers who now with one phone call could get a hold of 14 different cheeses, where before it was 14 different phone calls, which if you've ever tried to get a hold of a farmstead cheesemaker, these are busy people that don't generally answer the phone. So we saw suddenly that there was this opportunity, and that's really where the idea for the cellars at Jasper Hill was born. And we took this best in show win for Cabot Clothbound, which, Cabot Clothbound won in 2006, won best in show at the American Cheese Society. And we took that win and the contract we had with Cabot to the bank, literally. And that contract with Cabot was really interesting because it paid us these aging fees, right? It was like a line of credit that was tied to volume. They paid us to ripen the cheese, and then it was like a consignment deal. So, we sold the cheese to our customers, and Cabot billed us 45 days after we invoiced the customer. We paid them back the aging fees, and we paid them back the cost of the green cheese. And in that way, we were able to scale up. Well, we built this crazy piece of infrastructure. It's like 22,000 square feet underground, 7 vaulted tunnels. And, as our Cabot clothbound inventory grew, our monthly cash flow grew as well. And we went from 25 wheels of availability per month to, September of 2008. We went to 100 wheels of availability per month. And in December of 2008, we were like 400 wheels a month, every month. And then, what happened in the fall of 2008 and early 2009, the economy just went down the toilet right as we were starting up. So, January 2009, we sold 32 wheels of Cabot Clothbound, and we had another 400 wheels, coming ripe. In February 2009, we sold 17. And the whole enterprise was teetering at the edge of collapse. We had cash flow because we had all these aging fees from Cabot, but without sales, we were hitting the wall. And I went and visited every single one of our customers across the country. And in June, we sold 1,000 wheels of Cabot cloth bound. And what I learned really was that our customers are really partners and co-creators of the future that we're building for our community here and invested in our success. Because particularly in that moment, if the sellers at Jasper Hill had failed, it would have been a terrible thing for American cheese, right? Our customers knew it, and they went long with us to help us figure out how to stabilize this thing that we had built and this giant risk that we had taken and survive. And, there are deep loyalties and a lot of deep appreciation that we feel every day for the customers that have supported us along the way, because ultimately we wouldn't be here without the participation of, these market actors in our world.
Mm-hmm.
They're all in with us.
And when you say customers, is that a mix of cheese shops and restaurants or distributors?
Cheese shops, restaurants, distributors, everybody went all in. Even though nobody was in a position to the market just stopped. There's nothing moving, right? And so, we had distributors that cut huge POs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And cheese shops and restaurants that doubled down. And we are here because of the commitment of a lot of people, both, locally, but out there in the world to hold us up and help us elevate cheese in the United States.
I can vividly remember 2008, 2009. It was right before I opened my first restaurant in New York. It was hard to find a restaurant that didn't have, at the very least, the Cabot cloth bound and the Bailey Hazen on the menu. It was pretty much everywhere. It's still in a ton of them, but it was almost ubiquitous. You've won probably more awards than anyone could imagine when it comes to best cheese, best in show, internationally, nationally. You might be the first one ever that has collateralized cheese for a loan. That's pretty cool.
Well, cheese is a form of capital and a store of value. And so, the Italian banking industry was built, and there's still banks in Reggio Emilia where you can take your wheel of Parmigiano Reggiano and make a deposit, and they'll front you 80% of the cash value, on the spot. So cheese is a form of capital. Yeah. That is a foundational idea for us.
So you started, producing for Cabot, or at least aging for them. You built this massive cellar, 20,000 square foot underground cellar. How did you start, bringing in other cheesemakers or other farmers? What was sort of the next step there?
Well, initially it was a build it and they will come kind of approach. And we built it and they came with all their problems, their microbiological problems and their texture problems and their attitudinal disorders. And I think in the early days, we peaked at 13 cheese producers. And the problem was that either they didn't have the same commitment to quality that we had, or they didn't have the resources to really address some of, their infrastructure, the source of quality problems. And, turns out there isn't a market for second quality, artisan cheese. There isn't. In order to command the kind of premium price that is required to sustain a small artisan cheese business, you have to be able to deliver quality consistently at a very high level. And it's not as easy as it seems. I mean, there's all the microbiology, there's some foundational, the microbial ecology of raw milk cheese really is the sum of the practices on a farm and how you feed your cows, how you bed your cows, your water quality, your facility design, your milking protocols. And that's before you even get to the cheese making part.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that has to go right in order for a cheese to be delicious and great, I guess is my point.
Yeah.
For years, we had kind of a stable of, 4 farmstead cheesemakers from our area. And they've since retired, except for the Von Trapp farmstead, who produce Oma, and we ripen about half of their cheese production annually and introduce them to the market. And they make a few other cheeses that they distribute directly. Where, like, over time, our focus has shifted to really supporting like dairy farmers in our community. You know, there's this apocalypse that's happening in the dairy industry. It's been a trend that's been going on for probably decades at this point, where growth and scale, efficiency are driven by this kind of race for like cheap food. And the reality is that 50 cow, 100 cow dairies on a rocky hillside farms in Vermont can't compete with, 90,000 cow operations in Kansas, or these 40,000 cow dairies in the Central Valley of California, and milk is moving everywhere. They're pulling the water out of it and trucking it across the country, and then, putting the water back into it on the other side of the country. It's a crazy market out there. And our intention really is to funnel. One of the ways we think about our business is that we're building a pipeline to places in the country where there's disposable income. We're putting high value products into that pipeline, and we're sucking cash out of communities that have disposable income and redistributing it in ways that commodity markets don't. And our focus is really a 15-mile radius of Greensboro. It's our natural community. It's 4 towns. And I guess it's 7 or 8 years ago, we went through this like visioning process as a business. Everybody in the company wrote a vision of greatness. And that was one of the things that came out of that exercise. And every year, my brother Andy sorts all our expenses by zip code, and we make decisions about how to steer like the flows of capital that come into our business and then out in a way that like can maximize the impact within that 15-mile radius. And we spend a lot of money. We're not a wildly profitable business, but economic sustainability and profitability is like fundamental important to being able to achieve our mission, the mission piece. Profit is not the purpose, profit serves the purpose.
Yeah.
And in that sense, we're really looking at spending as much money, depositing as much money within our community and building as much wealth here as we can. And cheese is just the way we do that. It's the lever that we're yanking.
Yeah, it's almost like you're a warrior against commoditized industrialization. Cheese is the medium, but it seems to me that like you're fighting the fight against what is happening in our country. I mean, I'm sure across the world with just commoditizing, everything.
Yeah, and the homogenization of life as we know it, and that's one of the things about raw milk cheese that's, I think, so compelling, really, is that it is a real like reflection of a land, like, of farm practices, of people, the expression, the natural expression, or the expression of a natural economy, ultimately. And, we live inside a capitalist system, we're harnessing, the market that exists out there in a way that reverses the flows of capital, which for generations have flowed from rural communities and been concentrated in urban and suburban communities. Yeah. That's how you get Donald Trump, by the way, is too many years of just this extractive economic agricultural policy that lays waste to rural America. And, our intention is really to like reverse the flow of capital so that we have capital flowing from urban and suburban communities to, this rural community that, is otherwise challenged by the same global forces that every rural community around the world, across the world, is facing.
Yeah.
Cheese is powerful, and it's just this like incredibly dense value and values like packed, product.
Yeah. And what's so just inspiring about that is to accomplish that, you clearly you have to have this commitment to excellence, because if you had a mediocre product and you were trying to do that, it just wouldn't work.
It would not work. No.
Yeah.
No, like I tell my team, it's like we have to get up every morning and reach for like the gold ring. If you don't reach for perfection, you never achieve excellence, and you never achieve perfection either. But without reaching for it, you never achieve excellence.
Yeah.
And its quality is our only like comparative and competitive advantage because there's no competing on cost.
Yep.
We are a rounding error, out there in the dairy industry. And if we're going to succeed as a business, never mind as like a transformative agent of change in Greensboro, Vermont, the cheese just needs to be next level. It needs to be outstanding. And, we've taken to saying that like we make outrageously delicious cheese in order to conserve our working landscape, right? And it
Yeah.
needs to be outrageously delicious. And, that's the goal.
How do you like reiterate this mission, this vision to your team, like throughout the day, week, month? Obviously the process itself is doing some of that, but how else are you sort of like getting your team sort of energized and reminding them constantly of this? As I'm sure it's something that has to be part of the culture.
We've been able to like attract a critical mass of like folks that are crazy about cheese, right? We have the best team. We have the best like educators. Cheese education is like fundamental to our marketing efforts. We have a lot of thought leadership in our industry because we make ridiculous investments in quality. We have a microbiology lab and like, a doctor of microbiology with tools that enable us to do like full genome sequencing and like measure quality in all kinds of different ways. We have a sensory program that represents a huge amount of cost, right?
Yeah.
But it's like the combination and the feedback loops, the systematic production of like real data
Yeah.
that enable cheesemakers to really understand the trajectory of the cheese that they're making each and every day and across the seasons and across the years. That's one way. But the other part of it is just like, populating the business with like cheese fanatics, right?
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
becomes infectious because about half of our team is local and have no exposure to like fine dining and the world that our cheeses inhabit once they leave us. And the other half of our team is coming from, their chefs or their front of the house, their sommeliers, they're like, beer geeks, they're cheesemongers that are making career moves to move out here into the middle of nowhere to participate in this thing called Jasper Hill, right? So it's like it feeds on itself.
Yeah. What's so compelling about that is, you hear it like build culture in a company, and what it sounds like is you do that by the actions that you take and the decisions that you make. And that helps you to then acquire the people that are fanatics, because if you didn't make those decisions and you weren't clear on why you exist and you didn't have microbiologists on staff and you didn't decide to treat the hay the way that you treated that, those things, they see them every day. And that's what keeps reminding them every day and gets more people involved. I think it's a great lesson for anybody running a business is you can put every poster up you want and you can have every meeting you want about what we believe in, but nothing does that better than just doing it, at all costs.
Yeah.
I love that, man.
I was just going to say, like the pandemic was terrible for us. We lost 40% of our sales overnight when like, the food service industry just like shut down. And Andy and I spent some time thinking about how to respond. And we did two things. We dispersed the cows at our home farm, which was one of the hardest things we've ever done, to our neighbors so we could continue to support our neighbors in a really meaningful way. And we kept our people. And the second thing we did was double down on our investment in the tools and equipment and the facilities to make like real deal, like raw milk cheese, and to like take the quality of our cheese up 2 or 3 notches, right? So it was nerve wracking because on the one hand, our sales were going down the toilet. On the other hand, we decided to go spend almost $5 million on an expansion and investment in cheese making equipment to like really like take cheese quality up a notch. And this is like raw milk cheese, right? So it was like we're putting a stake in the ground big time on like raw milk cheese quality. We built this amazing facility and we have the capacity to make just the most beautiful cheese that really captures, the character of milk, where before like our process was kind of cobbled together with like cast off equipment that we had, like brought from here and there. And our cheese had all these technical defects and we didn't have great process control. Now we have process control and it becomes all about the milk. And it enables us to get into this whole other stage of our business where we can really focus on the milk and the farming side, the land side of the business in a way to like enhance the quality of the cheese, because from just a processing cheese making perspective, we have the right tools.
Yeah. So you got hit by a pandemic, lost 40% of your business, and then decided to invest $5 million on making it better. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So you have a microbiologist on staff. We have a whole facility on staff. And, it's clear you want to understand deeply at a cellular level what's happening with the cheese while all this is going on with the milk, with everything. How are you using microbiology to innovate?
Microbes are the source of deliciousness. Like fundamentally, cheese without microbes is not cheese. But, this is an incredible time to be in fermented foods because for millennia, humans have been making cheese, but understanding what's happening has been almost invisible. I used to say that being a cheesemaker is being like God, except you're blind and dumb because you unleash these universes of life and then you wipe them out, and then you see, oh, does this taste good or not? Now with these like next generation, like DNA sequencing, for instance, you can see what's happening and who's there and what the like biomechanics and how these communities assemble. And it's given us a really like ecological perspective on cheese. And the holy grail really is like understanding what the relationship between microbiology and like sensory attributes are, because once you kind of crack the code there, you can
You mean like texture
and flavor and aroma. Yeah, because the reality is that microbes have been studied ad infinitum in isolation, but they don't exist in isolation. They exist as parts of community. And so the way that we farm is really intended to create this microbial diversity. And what we've learned is that diversity is always good. Diversity as a human organization, diversity in terms of microbiology, ecology, and nature. Diversity always brings strength, resilience, and in the case of cheese, like complexity of flavor. And there's like a linear correlation between microbial diversity and complexity of flavor.
Interesting.
The lab has enabled us to really, start peeling back that diversity and learning how when you change a practice on the farm, it results in a change in the microbial ecology in the community, in the milk. And in that way, making raw milk cheese brings some risks, but we're bringing pathogens specifically. Most cheese is made with pasteurized milk. And when you pasteurize milk, you sever its connection to the practices and the place. And we're really working on building these cheeses and markets for these cheeses that have like next level, both texture and complexity of flavor.
Yeah.
And we do that by really, dialing in our farming system and the quality of our soil and the diversity of grass species and, the practices on our farms in order to maximize flavor potential. And that's our angle right there.
Yeah. So freaking cool, man. What's like one thing that you learned and maybe changed in the process through doing all these experiments and utilizing microbiology that has changed the way that you make cheese, or something that, some of the farming practices, or just any example of that you've now sort of like implemented into the cheese making process that you didn't do before?
Historically, some of the farms that we work with fed silage, fermented feed, right? And we learned that the ecology on those farms that feed fermented feed is different than the farms that feed dry hay, for instance. And we've been able to essentially eliminate like listeria and this like clostridial blowing and some of these like defects with big economic consequences by changing the way we feed our cows, right? The other thing we've learned through all of this is how to manage sanitation in a way that doesn't devastate the ecology, like of some of our environments in the cellars, right? Because the environment contaminates in the best sense of that word. The surface of the cheese, and it becomes like a feedback loop where if you clean too much, you don't want things to be dirty, but there are these like environmental management. For instance, we don't use any chlorine anymore in our creamery or on the farm either. It basically denatures protein, and even just a little residual like chlorine is going to like change the fundamentals of the like cheese chemistry. Right.
Yeah.
So things need to be clean. They do not want to be sterile.
Yeah. It reminds me of, there's a wine you probably know called Manzanilla, which is a sherry, and it's in this little town called San Lucar de Barrameda in coast of Spain. And there's this yeast that comes off the coast, flor is what they call it, and it inoculates the wine that they're making, and you can only get it there. And if they if they were trying to remove things in the environment, they would lose that. And I think now, because we know so much more, and science can be deployed so much more deeply to the things that we make, like it's just incredible what can happen now with wine, cheese, all these kinds of fermented products. I want to definitely dig into sort of what you see sort of coming next. So you're doing all these experiments, and obviously your cheese is everywhere, but what's sort of the next sort of net new innovation you're thinking about with cheese? And just to sort of make sure there's no box there, just even it could be just discovering something new about something that you already do to improve it.
I think like the quest for like quality is never ending, and cheese making is like a endless series of problems that require solving, because your raw material changes on a daily basis. Like winemakers have vintages and they're annual. We have a vintage every day, and that gives us the opportunity to like really kind of master like process and explore the technology, and because of the frequency. But like winemaking is of so much, like the microbiology of winemaking and the control you have in winemaking is so much greater. I mean, the microbiology is much simpler. The process has more control. So, the opportunities for improving on the cheese making and the execution of, this process day in and day out, and steering, the affinage, taking the cheese in different directions. The possibilities are kind of like endless, and the opportunity for lifelong learning is one of the things that I love so much about cheese. It's so complicated. When I take a step back and look at where we are in relation to like what's happening in the rest of the world, I really see this like consolidating force. Like capitalism is like mature, right? Amazon has bought Whole Foods, right? Kroger owns Murray's Cheese, right? There's 1,000 Murray's counters across the country. Our colleagues have all been purchased by multinational corporations. We're the last independent artisan cheesemaker at our scale in the United States. And those are the things that really occupy my mind about like, well, what comes next is really working on plotting a course for the business, using some of the like fundamental principles that we've talked about to ensure that, cheese and like Jasper Hill and cheese making in general is like installed in a generational way within our community, So I've been doing this 20 years at Jasper Hill. I've been making cheese for almost 30 years, and I have teenage kids. Who knows what they're thinking about? And I have this just incredible crew of young, ambitious people around me, and I'm starting to really focus on what comes next, and trying to thread the needle in a way that doesn't strip the business of its values, because I don't think we would be much without that.
Yeah, I think that is what the business is. More than a creamery or making cheese, the business is the values that you've instilled and that you're promulgating to the world.
Yeah, we call it values added product.
You're selling a mission with a side of cheese.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's awesome. And I know we're coming close to time. I wanted to dig for a minute, if we can, just sort of diverging a bit, because, I'm a chef. We live in the world of chefs and restaurants, and you work with a lot of chefs, and the cheese is used in a ton of restaurants as well. You're collaborating with some chefs on different types of cheese. You mentioned Dan Barber. Maybe if you want to talk a bit about the kind of projects that you're working on with chefs as it relates to cheese, and then any other interesting things that you've seen of how chefs are serving your cheese.
Yeah, it's always a blast to show up at a restaurant and watch how creative chefs can be with these cheeses that we know so intimately. And I always get a real charge out of that. The first time I saw tableside flambe of a Harbison.
Greg Backstrom, right? The fondue.
Yes.
Yeah, it's delicious, man. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was tasty too.
Yeah, full on next level reinterpretation. So there's that part, which is chefs taking our cheese and pairing our cheese in new and interesting ways, and the amount of creativity and innovation that's happening out there generally is just endless. But we have a long history of collaborations with chefs, whether it's taking fig leaves that are picked off the fig tree in the front yard at the French Laundry and macerating them and wrapping cheese for their menu. Or, the project we're working on presently with Blue Hill and Chef Dan Barber, it's bone char, which is, they're taking all the bones from their butchery. They have a whole animal butchery, and they make charcoal out of them, grind them up and send us the charcoal. And they're simultaneously making garum from beef, and that comes to us, and we're washing the cheese. It's called bone char with garum, and then ashing it with the bone char, and it's phenomenal. You get that deep umami character from the garum. It comes right through.
It sounds so freaking good,
and it's beautiful. It's it's this little black ingot with a little fuzz of white mold on it. And
yeah.
We've done all kinds of special wash. We call them special wash collaborations, where chefs will either choose a beverage or liquor of their choosing, and will wash grind cheeses for
That's
them.
Cool.
It's a way for us to really kind of get close to and inspired by innovators out there on the front lines of the food industry that are coming up with ideas. The bone char is a real kind of circle closing. It completes the circle in a really kind of cool and interesting way.
It sounds so good, man. Let me ask you, I always think about this for my business, and I tend to ask everybody this anyways. If time and money were not a barrier at all, what would you do next with Jasper Hill, with any of the project you're doing? Assuming that, infinite time could happen quickly and capital was not a constraint, what would you do?
I would really kind of double down on the waste streams that we produce in a way that would kind of enable us to capture any value that's currently trickling away. For instance, I think we'd probably build a distillery to take, our whey and turn it into something awesome. I think we would revisit a whey-fed pork and charcuterie program, which we had started, and we really lost the plot during COVID. We lost all our kill slots. So probably build a slaughterhouse and a vertically integrated like meat business that would be nested within the waste streams that we're producing on the farm. That sort of thing.
Is there other waste that happens in the farming process? Or?
Well, not all cheese is delicious, and we only sell delicious cheese.
Mhm.
And the first advice I ever give anybody that's starting out is go buy some pigs.
Yeah, gotcha. So it's doing something with the X% of cheese that you have to assume is just a loss.
Yeah, and we have tasting wheels and...
That's awesome. Who's your biggest influence in life?
I was thinking about who that might be, and like the first thing that came to mind would be my parents, who are both really inspirational people in different ways. I think we get like our ethical and moral compass from mom, and dad is like a serial entrepreneurial man who never met a risk he didn't want to take. And it's a combination of both our parents that have enabled us to really kind of take the leap in a really thoughtful and clear, considered way. Then I was like, that's kind of a cop-out, mom and dad, But
well, you can see a direct line there for sure with what you're doing. So
then otherwise, I'd say probably Noam Chomsky.
Interesting, yeah.
Who I read endlessly and has really kind of fixed my worldview in terms of, the political economy of the world that we live in, right? And how to nest our work within the context of what's happening in the world at large.
Yeah, he's a brilliant thinker. Love that. Any like favorite books that you go back to or recommend often?
The Botany of Desire, Michael Pollan.
Oh, yeah.
It's his first book. It's a natural history of like 4 plants. Was really influential for me early on and changed the way I think about like agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's written a lot of books since then, but that's a great book.
Yeah. Omnivore's Dilemma is also an incredible one.
Amazing. Yeah. In Omnivore's Dilemma, he takes like the foundational work he did in Botany of Desire and like really bumps it up. Yeah.
I just finished Changing Your Mind as well, which is really, really awesome.
Yes.
Mateo, this was even better than I could have thought. So thanks so much for taking some time.
Awesome. And I can't wait to watch Mies just blossom out there in the world, and look forward to keeping up with you and collaborating if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. Any last words you want to say to friends, colleagues, anywhere out there in the world?
Standardization is the enemy, in the sense that the whole world is being standardized. We're hoping that like people can really start to explore quality in a way that is not dependent on standardization, right? So, our cheese, for instance, is variable. We have but within a certain bandwidth of quality.
Mm-hmm.
Look for those producers out there of like real products, because the small washing, the artisan washing, the green washing, it's hard to really penetrate the world of marketing in a way that like reveals, truly authentic products that are produced by real people in real places.
Yeah. That is an awesome way to end this. Standardization is the enemy. I love that, man. Well, thank you again.
Hey.
Appreciate it.
Be well.
Cheers. Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with your fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.